She sat on that bench like a queen on a throne, convinced that her gavel was a lightning bolt she could use to strike down anyone who didn't look like her. Judge Valeria Calloway was the nightmare of Oak Creek County. Wealthy, connected, and openly prejudiced, she had ruined hundreds of lives with a smile on her face, believing her power was absolute. But she made one fatal mistake. She assumed the quiet black man in the orange jumpsuit, head bowed and silent, was just another statistic. She didn't know his name was Desmond Barrett. She didn't know he had been waiting for this exact moment, and she certainly didn't know that by the time he was done speaking, she wouldn't be the one holding the gavel. She'd be the one in handcuffs. This is the story of how a racist judge lost everything. The air conditioning in courtroom 4B had been broken for days, leaving the heavy, stale air of a South Carolina summer to settle over the gallery like a wet wool blanket. It smelled of floor wax, nervous sweat, and the distinct metallic tang of despair. But up on the bench, Judge Valeria Calloway looked as cool as ice. Valeria was 62, though her esthetician swore she could pass for 45. She wore her platinum blonde hair in a rigid bob that didn't move when she turned her head. Her robe was custom-tailored silk, not the cheap polyester issued by the state. Beneath the robe, she wore pearls that cost more than the bailiff officer made in years. "Mr. Henderson," Valeria said, her voice dripping with that slow, deceptive southern sweetness that usually preceded a life sentence. She peered over her rimless glasses at the terrified 19-year-old black kid trembling at the defense table. "I have read your file. Possession of marijuana. Resisting arrest." "It was a joint, Your Honor," the public defender, a tired man named Gary Langston, began, "and he resisted because Officer Kane twisted his arm." Valeria cut him off, her eyes narrowing. "Do not interrupt me. In my courtroom, we respect the law, and the law says your client is a menace." She slammed her gavel. "Maximum sentence, 6 months in county jail, followed by 3 years probation. Next case." A murmur of shock went through the gallery. For a first offense, it was unheard of. But this was Calloway's court. She didn't dispense justice. She dispensed her personal version of social cleansing. She believed she was the gatekeeper of Oak Creek, protecting decent people from the riffraff. "Call the next case," she snapped, checking her Rolex. Officer Miller, a heavy-set man who had learned years ago to keep his mouth shut and his eyes down, cleared his throat. Docket number 4492. The State versus Desmond Barrett. Charges: aggravated assault on a police officer, destruction of public property, and disorderly conduct. The side door opened. Valeria grabbed her water glass, taking a sip as she watched the defendant enter. She expected the usual: someone loud, perhaps defiant, or maybe weeping and begging. What she got was silence. Desmond Barrett walked in. He was tall, wearing the standard-issue orange jumpsuit that hung loosely on his frame. He was in his late 30s or early 40s, with a shaved head and a neatly trimmed beard. His hands were cuffed in front of him, and he held a manila folder awkwardly between his fingers. But it was his eyes that made Valeria pause for a fraction of a second. They were dark, unblinking, and utterly devoid of fear. He didn't look at the floor. He didn't look at the gallery. He looked directly at her. It wasn't a glare. It was a study. He was analyzing her. "Mr. Barrett," Valeria said, leaning back. She enjoyed this part, the moment she could make a grown man feel small. "You are charged with assaulting Deputy Kane, a serious offense. I see you declined a public defender." "I did," Desmond said. His voice was a deep baritone, calm and resonant. It carried to the back of the room without effort. "So you are representing yourself?" Valeria scoffed, sharing a smirk with the prosecutor, Marcus Cole. Marcus was Valeria's favorite, 35, ambitious, and with the moral backbone of a chocolate eclair. He wanted to be district attorney, and he knew the road to the DA's office went through Judge Calloway's favor. "Yes, Your Honor," Desmond replied. I am representing myself pro se. A fool for a client? Valeria muttered loud enough for the court reporter to hear. Very well, Mr. Cole. Let's get this over with. I have a lunch reservation. Marcus stood up, buttoning his expensive suit jacket. Your Honor, the state moves to deny bail. The defendant attacked Deputy Kane during a routine traffic stop. He is violent, unpredictable, and a danger to this community. We have dashcam footage, though it is partially corrupted, and the testimony of 2 officers. Valeria nodded, barely listening. She had already made up her mind the moment Desmond walked in. Denied. Remand to custody until trial. Objection, Desmond said. The room went silent. You could hear the buzzing of a fly against the window pane. Valeria slowly turned her head. Excuse me? I said objection, Desmond repeated. He didn't raise his voice. He simply opened his manila folder. Under South Carolina Code of Laws, Section 171510, I'm entitled to a bond hearing unless charged with a capital offense or punishable by life imprisonment. Assault on an officer carries a maximum of 10 years. Furthermore, under State v. Thompson, the court must consider my ties to the community and flight risk. You have asked me 0 questions regarding either. Valeria blinked. Her face flashed a light shade of pink. It wasn't just that he knew the statute. It was the way he said it. He spoke like a professor, correcting a slow student. I don't need a lecture on the law from a thug who punches cops, Mr. Barrett, Valeria hissed. I determine flight risk, and looking at you, you look like a flight risk. Looking at me? Desmond asked, a faint, dangerous smile touching his lips. Is that a judicial determination, Your Honor? Or is that a personal bias based on my appearance? Marcus Cole jumped up. Objection. The defendant is being argumentative. Sustained. Valeria slammed her gavel so hard it rattled the water pitcher. Mr. Barrett, one more word of disrespect, and I will hold you in contempt so fast your head will spin. Bail is set at $500,000. Cash only. It was an impossible amount, a ransom. It was designed to keep him in a cage until she could ship him to prison. Desmond didn't flinch. He didn't beg. He simply wrote something down on a notepad inside his folder. Is there anything else? Valeria asked, her voice tight. Yes, Desmond said, looking up from his notes. I would like to enter a motion for the immediate recusal of Judge Valeria Calloway from this case. The gallery gasped. Officer Miller's eyes went wide. Valeria laughed. It was a cold, sharp sound. You want me to recuse myself? On what grounds? Because I set a high bail? No, Desmond said softly. Because of your financial relationship with the plaintiff, Deputy Kane, and your undisclosed investments in the private holding company that manages the county jail's commissary and communication systems. You profit every day I sit in that cell, Your Honor. That creates a conflict of interest under Canon 3 of the Code of Judicial Conduct. Valeria felt a cold drop of sweat slide down her spine. The room seemed to tilt. How does he know that? She thought. Nobody knows that. Motion denied, she croaked, her voice suddenly hoarse. Take him away now. Officer Miller moved to grab Desmond, but Desmond turned voluntarily, placing his hands behind his back. As he was led away, he looked over his shoulder at Valeria. See you tomorrow, Valeria, he said. Not, Your Honor, not Judge. Valeria. She sat there, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She looked at Marcus Cole, who looked equally confused. Who the hell was Desmond Barrett? The holding cell, in the basement of the Oak Creek courthouse, was designed to break spirits. It was a concrete box with a stainless steel toilet and a bench that sapped the heat right out of your bones. Desmond sat on the bench, eyes closed, meditating. He wasn't a thug. He wasn't a drifter. Years earlier, Desmond Barrett had been one of the top forensic accountants in Chicago. He specialized in following money trails that powerful people tried to hide: cartels, corrupt senators, shell corporations. He had a beautiful wife, Sarah, and a 3-year-old daughter, Maya. Then came the accident. A drunk driver, a semi-truck. He lost them both in a heartbeat. Grief had driven him away from the city, away from the numbers, away from his life. He had spent years wandering, working construction, living quietly, trying to outrun the ghosts. He had settled in Oak Creek recently, working as a mechanic. He kept his head down until Deputy Kane pulled him over for a broken taillight that was perfectly functional. Kane had been aggressive, shouting, hand on his gun. When Kane tried to drag Desmond out of the car, Kane had tripped over his own feet, scraping his knee. That was the assault. But while Desmond was being processed, he overheard a conversation. He saw files on a desk that shouldn't have been there. And when he saw Judge Calloway's name on the docket, the old part of his brain, the part that hunted corruption, woke up. He had spent the nights in jail not sleeping, but listening. Prisoners talk, guards talk, and Desmond had a photographic memory. Back in the courtroom, Judge Calloway stormed into her chambers. She threw her robe onto the leather sofa and poured herself a stiff drink from the crystal decanter hidden behind a row of law books. "Marcus!" she barked. Marcus Cole hurried in, closing the door behind him. "Your Honor, Who is he?" she demanded, her hands shaking slightly. "He knew about the commissary fund. That is a blind trust, Marcus. My name isn't on any of that paperwork. My husband's name isn't even on it. It's a shell company in the Caymans." "I don't know," Marcus stammered, wiping sweat from his forehead. "I ran his prints. He's clean. No priors, just a valid driver's license from Illinois. He works at Nolan's Auto Body on 4th Street. He's a mechanic, Valeria. Just a grease monkey. A grease monkey who cites specific case law and knows about my financial portfolio." Valeria slammed her glass down. "Dig deeper. I want to know where he went to school, who his parents are, and what he had for breakfast in 1995. You find me dirt, Marcus. If he knows about the commissary, what else does he know?" "I'm on it," Marcus said. "But about the bail, $500,000. The press might pick up on that. It's excessive for a simple assault." "I don't care about the press," Valeria shrieked. "I am the press in this town. I own the narrative. Just get me something I can use to bury him." Marcus nodded and fled the room. Valeria sat at her heavy oak desk. She opened the drawer and pulled out a burner phone. She dialed a number she hadn't called in months. "It's me," she whispered. "We might have a leak." The next morning, the courtroom was fuller. Word spreads fast in small towns. The rumor was that a drifter had talked back to Queen Valeria and lived. People wanted to see the show. Desmond was brought in. He looked fresh, despite having slept on concrete. "Mr. Barrett," Valeria said, her voice icy and controlled. She had regained her composure. She was the judge. He was the criminal. That was the natural order. "We are here for the arraignment hearing. How do you plead?" "Not guilty," Desmond said, "and I would like to renew my motion for your recusal." "Denied," Valeria said instantly. "And since you are representing yourself, I am setting a trial date very soon. I'm clearing my calendar." Marcus Cole looked surprised. "Your Honor, the prosecution needs time to gather discovery." "Mr. Cole, you have the dash cam and the officer's testimony. What more do you need?" "Justice delayed is justice denied," Valeria said, quoting a maxim she usually ignored. She wanted Desmond convicted and shipped to the state penitentiary before he could dig any further. "I accept the date," Desmond said. "However, I have a motion for discovery. I am requesting the full unedited dashcam footage from Deputy Kane's cruiser." The file provided to the prosecution was a 4-minute clip. The metadata indicates the recording was 20 minutes long. Valeria narrowed her eyes. "Mr. Cole?" "I gave him what the sheriff's department gave me," Marcus said. "They said the camera malfunctioned." Cameras don't malfunction in a way that selectively deletes the minutes prior to the arrest, but keeps the audio intact, Desmond said calmly. "I also request the disciplinary records of Deputy Kane, specifically the internal affairs complaints filed against him for racial profiling." Those records are sealed, Marcus shouted. This is a fishing expedition. It's a pattern of behavior, Desmond countered. Under Brady versus Maryland, the prosecution is legally obligated to turn over exculpatory evidence. Deputy Kane's history of lying on police reports is exculpatory. Valeria felt that tightening in her chest again. He was boxing them in. If she denied the discovery request, it would be immediate grounds for an appeal. If she granted it, they would see that Kane was a liability. I will review the records in camera, Valeria said, using a legal maneuver to keep the files private. I will decide if they are relevant. Fair enough, Desmond said. I also request the subpoena of a witness. Who? Valeria asked. Desmond looked at the gallery. He looked directly at a man sitting in the back row, a man in an expensive gray suit who had been trying to remain inconspicuous. It was Councilman Quentin Vance, a man Valeria had been funneling construction contracts to for years. I call Councilman Quentin Vance, Desmond said. Valeria's blood ran cold. Councilman Vance? He wasn't at the scene. He has nothing to do with this case. Actually, Desmond said, Deputy Kane called Councilman Vance minutes after he arrested me. While I was in the back of the cruiser, I heard the conversation. He asked the councilman, "Is this the guy you wanted off the street?" The courtroom erupted. Reporters in the front row started typing furiously on their laptops. Councilman Vance turned pale and stood up, pushing his way out of the courtroom doors. Valeria slammed her gavel, the sound cracking like a gunshot. Order! Order in this court! She glared at Desmond with pure hatred. This wasn't a traffic stop. This was a hit. Someone had targeted Desmond. But why? And how did Desmond know so much? Mr. Barrett, Valeria said, her voice trembling with rage, you are treading on very thin ice. The ice is already cracking, Valeria, Desmond replied. You just haven't fallen in yet. The Oak Creek Country Club was a sanctuary for the town's elite. It was a place where deals were made over scotch and cigars far away from the prying eyes of the voters. Judge Valeria Calloway sat at a secluded table on the terrace overlooking the 18th hole. Her hands were trembling, clinking the ice in her glass. Opposite her sat Councilman Quentin Vance. He looked worse than she did, sweaty, pale, and constantly checking his phone. You need to fix this, Valeria, Vance hissed, keeping his voice low. Do you know who that man is? I made some calls to Chicago. Desmond Barrett isn't a mechanic. He's a ghost. He used to be a forensic auditor for the Department of Justice. He took down the grim reapers of the financial world. Valeria felt the blood drain from her face. A Fed? Ex-Fed. He quit years ago after his family died, disappeared. But the man is a machine, Valeria. If he's sniffing around the Plaza Project, we are dead. Buried. The Plaza Project was the crown jewel of their corruption. Vance and Valeria, along with a silent partner, the sheriff, had been systematically seizing property in the poor, predominantly black district of Oak Creek under the guise of eminent domain or civil asset forfeiture. They were buying the land for pennies and selling it to a developer for millions. Desmond's auto shop, the one he worked at and lived above, was the last holdout on the block. The owner, an elderly man named Mr. Nolan, had refused to sell. So that's why Kane arrested him? Valeria whispered. To pressure Nolan? To scare the mechanic away? Kane was supposed to just rough him up, find some drugs in the car, and scare him out of town, Vance groaned. But Kane is an idiot. He panicked when Barrett didn't flinch. And now, Barrett is sitting in your jail cell, peeling back the layers of our operation like an onion. Valeria straightened her back. Her arrogance, her armor, returned. He's in my jail, in my courtroom. I control the record. I control the evidence. I will bury his motions in so much red tape he won't see the sun until he's 70. Don't underestimate him, Vance warned. He heard the phone call, Valeria. He knows. Hearsay, Valeria scoffed. Without the phone records, it's the word of a violent criminal against a respected councilman. I'll deny the subpoena for your records. I'll fast-track the trial. By the end of the week, he'll be a convicted felon. Meanwhile, inside the county jail, Desmond Barrett had a visitor. It wasn't the prosecutor. It was Gary Langston, the public defender Valeria had shut down earlier. Gary looked nervous, sitting on the other side of the plexiglass. "I'm not your lawyer, Barrett," Gary said, fidgeting with his tie. "You made that clear. Why did you put me on your visitation list?" Desmond picked up the phone receiver. "Because you're the only man in that courtroom who looked ashamed, Gary." Gary blinked. He looked down at his shoes. "Valeria runs this town. You can't win. I've seen her destroy better men than you. Take the plea. If you plead to simple assault, she might give you time served and probation. You can leave town." "I'm not leaving," Desmond said calmly, "and I need a favor. I told you I'm not representing you." "I don't need representation. I need a courier." Desmond pressed a small folded piece of paper against the glass. It had a series of numbers and a web address written on it. "My house was raided by the police after my arrest. They took my laptop. They took my files, but they didn't find the backup." Gary squinted at the paper. "What is this?" "It's a cloud server key," Desmond said. "I need you to go to the library. Use a public computer. Download the folder labeled Project OC and print 3 copies. Send one to the State Attorney General's office. Send one to the FBI field office in Columbia. And bring the third one to court on the morning of the trial." Gary stared at him. "If I do that, and Valeria finds out, my career is over. Hell, in this town, my life might be over." "Gary," Desmond's voice was soft but intense. "They are stealing land from old people. They are framing kids to fill the private prison beds they invest in. Valeria Calloway isn't a judge. She's a predator. You became a lawyer to fight for justice, didn't you? Or was that just a lie you told yourself?" Gary looked at the paper. He looked at the tired lines around his own eyes reflected in the glass. He had spent years letting Valeria bully him. He took a pen and copied the numbers onto his hand. "On the morning of the trial," Gary whispered, "don't make me regret this." The morning of the trial arrived with a thunderstorm that rattled the windows of the Oak Creek courthouse. The atmosphere inside courtroom 4B was even more volatile. The gallery was packed. The local news had picked up the story of the mystery mechanic, and the back rows were filled with curious locals, including Mr. Nolan, the owner of the auto shop, who looked terrified for his employee. Valeria entered. She didn't look at the gallery. She looked straight at Desmond. "Court is in session," she announced. "State versus Barrett. We are skipping opening statements in the interest of time. Mr. Cole, call your first witness." It was a blatant violation of procedure to skip opening statements, but Desmond didn't object. He just sat there watching. Marcus Cole stood up, looking smug. "The state calls Deputy Wayne Kane." Deputy Kane walked to the stand. He was a large man with a buzz cut and a neck that spilled over his collar. He glared at Desmond as he took the oath. "Deputy," Marcus began, "walk us through the night of the incident." "Yes, sir," Kane said, his voice rehearsed. "I observed the defendant's vehicle, a 2018 Ford, swerving across the center line. I initiated a traffic stop. Upon approaching the vehicle, I noticed the defendant appeared agitated. I asked him to step out. He refused. When I attempted to open the door, he lunged at me, striking me in the chest and knee, causing me to fall. I had to use necessary force to subdue him." "Thank you," Marcus said. "And did you fear for your life?" "I did. He was like a wild animal." Valeria nodded sympathetically. "Cross-examination, Mr. Barrett." Desmond stood up. He didn't have a notepad. He didn't walk to the podium. He stood behind his table, hands clasped. "Deputy Kane," Desmond began, "you stated I was swerving. Yet in your initial police report, which I have a copy of here, you wrote that the probable cause for the stop was a broken taillight. Which is it?" Kane hesitated. He looked at Marcus. It was both. You were swerving, and I saw the light. I see, Desmond said. And you stated I struck you. Can you describe the blow? You punched me in the chest with a closed fist. Yes, right or left hand? Kane blinked. Right hand? Desmond nodded. He turned to the judge. Your Honor, I would like to submit Exhibit A, my medical records from the day of the arrest. Relevance? Valeria snapped. The records show that on the day of the arrest, my right hand was in a soft cast brace due to a sprained wrist I sustained while fixing a transmission days prior. If I punched Deputy Kane with a closed right fist hard enough to knock down a 250-pound man, my hand would be shattered. The x-rays taken by the jail nurse show no new injuries. A murmur went through the crowd. Perhaps it was your left hand, Kane stammered, sweating. You just swore under oath it was my right, Desmond said coldly. But let's talk about the broken taillight. Mr. Nolan, my employer, is a certified mechanic. He inspects all shop cars every morning. Mr. Nolan, Desmond turned to the gallery. Objection, Marcus shouted. He can't address the gallery? Sustained, Valeria yelled. Mr. Barrett, stop grandstanding. Very well, Desmond said. Deputy Kane, isn't it true that you didn't pull me over for a traffic violation at all? Isn't it true you pulled me over because you were told to shake me down by Councilman Vance? That's a lie, Kane shouted, his face turning red. Is it? Desmond walked around the table. You testified that your dash cam malfunctioned. But deputy, you wear a body camera, don't you? The battery died. Interesting, Desmond said, because under the Freedom of Information Act, I requested the maintenance logs for all body cameras in the precinct. Your camera, serial number 4492, was fully charged and checked out that afternoon. The arrest happened that evening. A battery lasts 12 hours. Did you manually turn it off, deputy? I don't recall. You don't recall destroying evidence? Desmond's voice rose, booming off the walls. Or did you turn it off because you knew what you were about to do was illegal? Objection! Badgering the witness! Marcus screamed. Sustained. Valeria slammed her gavel. Mr. Barrett, move on, or I will hold you in contempt. Desmond looked at Valeria. The look was pitying. I have no further questions for this witness, Desmond said, but I reserve the right to recall him. Kane scrambled off the stand, looking like he wanted to vomit. Mr. Cole, next witness, Valeria commanded, trying to regain control. She could feel the energy in the room shifting. The audience wasn't afraid anymore. They were angry. The state rests, Marcus said abruptly. He knew his other witnesses were just as shaky. The defense may present its case, Valeria said. Do you have witnesses, Mr. Barrett? I do, Desmond said. I called Judge Valeria Calloway to the stand. The silence that followed was absolute. Valeria laughed, a high, nervous sound. You cannot call the presiding judge as a witness in her own court. That is absurd. Motion denied. Then I have a problem, Your Honor, Desmond said, because you are a material witness to the conspiracy to deprive me of my civil rights. But since you refuse to testify, I will call my next witness. Desmond turned to the back of the room. The doors opened. Gary Langston didn't walk in. Instead, two men in dark suits walked in. They were wearing sunglasses and earpieces. Behind them walked a woman with gray hair and a sharp, no-nonsense demeanor. Valeria froze. She recognized the woman. It was Lila Price, the state attorney general, and she was holding the file Gary Langston had printed. Your Honor, the attorney general said, her voice cutting through the room like a razor. I apologize for the interruption, but I'm afraid this trial is suspended. On what authority? Valeria shrieked, standing up. This is my courtroom. Not anymore, Lila Price said, walking past the bar. She signaled to the men in suits. They were State Bureau of Investigation agents. We have received credible evidence of racketeering, judicial misconduct, and fraud involving this court, the Sheriff's Department, and the city council. She held up the file. Mr. Barrett's cloud backup contained authorized wiretaps from his time as a federal consultant. The AG continued. It seems Mr. Barrett has been recording his own phone calls for months, including the one where Councilman Vance called him a week ago, threatening to have his judge take care of him if he didn't sell the land. Valeria slumped into a chair. The gavel slipped from her hand and clattered onto the floor. Desmond stood still, his face impassive. He looked at Valeria. "I told you, Valeria," he said softly, his voice carrying over the stunned silence of the crowd. "The ice is breaking." The agents moved toward the bench. "Judge Calloway," one of the agents said, pulling out a pair of handcuffs, "please step down from the bench." The sound of handcuffs ratcheting shut is distinct. It is a sharp mechanical clicking that signifies the end of freedom. For years, Judge Valeria Calloway had heard that sound from the comfort of her high leather chair. She had watched bailiffs wrestle weeping mothers and stoic fathers into submission, the metal biting into their wrists as she signed the paperwork that ruined their lives. She had never, not once, imagined how cold the metal actually felt. Judge Valeria Calloway, the SBI agent said, his voice devoid of the deference she was used to, "You are under arrest for racketeering, wire fraud, conspiracy to commit extortion, and deprivation of civil rights under color of law. You have the right to remain silent." Valeria stood there, her arms wrenched behind her back, the silk of her robe bunched up awkwardly. She looked at the gallery. The faces that stared back weren't fearful anymore. They were stunned, yes, but beneath the shock, there was a rising tide of vindication. "This is a mistake!" Valeria screamed, her composure shattering. "I am a judge! You can't do this! Marcus, do something!" She looked frantically at the prosecutor's table. Marcus Cole was standing very still, his face pale. He looked at Valeria. Then he looked at the Attorney General, and then he looked at his shoes. He slowly took a step away from the defense table, distancing himself from her physically and legally. I had no knowledge of this," Marcus stammered, his survival instinct kicking in. "I was just following the docket." "You coward!" Valeria shrieked as the agents began to lead her away. "I made you! I own you!" "Get her out of here," Attorney General Price ordered. As they marched Valeria past the defense table, Desmond Barrett didn't move. He didn't gloat. He simply watched her, their eyes locked for one final second. In his gaze, she saw no anger, only the terrifying clarity of a mirror reflecting her own ugliness back at her. "Desmond," she spat his name like a curse. "You're a dead man. You hear me? You're dead." "And you," Desmond replied, his voice calm and steady, "are a defendant." The door swung open, and the press, sensing blood in the water, pushed against the bailiffs. Flashbulbs erupted like lightning storms. The image of the impeccable Judge Calloway, hair mussed, robe twisted, handcuffs gleaming, was captured 1,000 times in a single second. It was the photo that would grace the front page of every newspaper in South Carolina. The next morning, back in the courtroom, the silence was broken by the Attorney General. "All charges against Desmond Barrett are immediately dismissed with prejudice," she announced. "Mr. Barrett, you are free to go." The gallery erupted. It wasn't polite applause. It was a roar. Mr. Nolan, the old mechanic, was weeping openly. People hugged each other. It was the sound of a community that had been holding its breath for decades, finally exhaling. Desmond stood up. He rubbed his wrists where the cuffs had been earlier. He shook Gary Langston's hand. "You did the right thing, Gary," Desmond said. Gary looked like he had aged years and minutes, but he smiled. "I think I finally did." The sweep was swift and brutal. While Valeria was being booked, forced to trade her silk robe for the same scratchy orange jumpsuit she had sentenced Desmond to wear, the SBI was executing warrants across the city. Councilman Quentin Vance was arrested at the country club. He tried to run out the back exit of the kitchen, slipping on a grease spill and breaking his nose before being tackled by federal agents. He was dragged out, past his wealthy donors, bleeding and screaming about sovereign immunity. Deputy Wayne Kane was arrested in the locker room of the sheriff's department. When they searched his locker, they didn't just find the missing body cam footage. They found a stash of cash and drugs that he had planted on suspects for years. The protection he offered was nothing more than a predatory tax on the vulnerable. But the real treasure trove was in the digital files Desmond had backed up. Desmond hadn't just recorded phone calls. During his time as a mechanic, he had fixed the cars of the sheriff, the mayor, and the judge's husband. And like any good forensic auditor, he had noticed things: receipts left in glove boxes, GPS history logs. He had pieced together the map of corruption using the very vehicles they used to drive over the poor. The Plaza Project was exposed as a massive fraud scheme. Valeria and Vance had been using city funds to condemn properties, evicting low-income families, and then selling the land to a shell corporation they owned for $1. That corporation would then sell the land to developers for millions. They had stolen millions from the taxpayers and destroyed historic black neighborhoods in the process. And they would have gotten away with it if they hadn't tried to steal a mechanic's shop from a man who knew how to follow the money. Months later, the Oak Creek County Jail was not designed for comfort. It was designed for punishment. Judge Valeria Calloway knew this better than anyone. She had approved the budget cuts that removed the air conditioning and reduced the food quality to minimum nutritional standards. Now she lived in it. Valeria sat on the bottom bunk of cell block C. The air was stifling, smelling of mildew and unwashed bodies. Her platinum bob had grown out, revealing harsh gray roots. Her skin, deprived of expensive creams and spa treatments, looked papery and old. She wasn't in general population. That would have been a death sentence. She was in protective custody, which meant solitary confinement for 23 hours a day. "Chow time!" a guard yelled, sliding a metal tray through the slot in the door. Valeria walked over. The tray held a scoop of gray mash that smelled like wet cardboard and a piece of stale bread. "I can't eat this," Valeria said, her voice raspy. "I have dietary restrictions. I need gluten-free options. I demand to speak to the warden." The guard on the other side laughed. It was a woman's voice, Officer Hernandez. Valeria remembered her. She had suspended Hernandez for weeks without pay for being minutes late to court. "You get what everyone else gets, inmate 8940, Hernandez said. "Bon appetit." Valeria slumped against the cold concrete wall. She closed her eyes, trying to summon her old power, her old indignation, but it was gone. She was just an old woman in a cage. The worst part wasn't the food or the cold. It was the silence. In the silence, she could hear the ghosts of the people she had sent here. She remembered their faces. The teenage boys she called thugs. The single mothers she lectured about responsibility. They had sat in this exact cell. They had stared at this exact wall. The door buzzed. "Legal visit," Hernandez announced. Valeria perked up. Her lawyer. Finally, she was led into a small meeting room. Her lawyer, a high-priced defense attorney from Atlanta named Marcus Thorne, looked grim. "Get me out of here, Marcus," Valeria demanded, sitting down. "I want bail. I want house arrest. I have a heart condition." "Valeria," Marcus said, not opening his briefcase. "We have a problem." "What problem? Just file the motion." "The venue has been changed," Marcus said. "The state Supreme Court ruled that you can't be tried in Oak Creek. The bias is too high. They moved the trial to Columbia." "That's fine," Valeria said. "I have friends in Columbia." "Not anymore," Marcus said. "The evidence is overwhelming. Desmond Barrett gave them everything. The bank accounts in the Caymans, they found them. The emails where you called the defendants cattle, they have them. The audio of you laughing about evicting the Johnson family on Christmas Eve, it's all over the news." Valeria felt a cold pit in her stomach. "So we fight it. I am a judge." "Valeria, listen to me." Marcus leaned in. Marcus Cole took a plea deal this morning. He's testifying against you. Councilman Vance took a plea deal an hour ago. He's testifying against you. Deputy Kane is testifying against you. They turned on you. They are singing like birds to save their own skins. You are the ringleader, Valeria. The prosecution isn't offering a deal. They are going for the maximum. Maximum? Valeria whispered. 30 years, Marcus said. Federal prison. Valeria stared at him. 30 years? She was 62. That was a life sentence. No. She shook her head. No, this isn't happening. It is happening, Marcus said, standing up. My advice? Pleading guilty might get it down to 20. But honestly, Valeria, with the public outcry, the judge they assigned is going to make an example out of you. Who is the judge? Valeria asked, her voice trembling. Marcus hesitated. Judge Alistair Thorne. Valeria gasped. Alistair Thorne was legendary. He was known as the Hammer. He was a strict constitutionalist, utterly immune to politics, and he had a particular hatred for public corruption. Worse, Valeria had publicly insulted him at a judicial conference years ago, calling him soft on crime because he supported rehabilitation programs. Karma hadn't just come knocking, it had kicked down the door. The trial of Valeria Calloway began months later. It was dubbed the trial of the decade. The courtroom in Columbia was packed, but this time, Valeria sat at the defense table. She wore a simple gray suit that hung loosely on her frame. She looked small. The prosecution's case was a masterclass in dismantling a life. For weeks, the jury watched as Valeria's carefully constructed empire was peeled back layer by rotting layer. They played the tapes. Who cares if they have nowhere to go? Valeria's voice on the recording was clear, sharp, and cruel. It's prime real estate. If they can't afford to live in Oak Creek, they should move to the swamp. I'm doing the town a favor by flushing the toilet. The jury, a diverse group of 12 citizens, looked at Valeria with open disgust. She couldn't meet their eyes. Then came the witnesses. One by one, the people Valeria had wronged took the stand. Not the politicians, but the victims. Mrs. Higgins, an 80-year-old widow whose home was seized for the Plaza Project, walked to the stand with a cane. She told me my house was a blight, Mrs. Higgins said, pointing a shaking finger at Valeria. She told me I was occupying valuable space. My husband built that house with his own hands after the war. She took it and she laughed. And finally, the prosecution called their last witness. The state calls Desmond Barrett. Desmond walked to the stand. He wore a sharp black suit. He looked strong, healthy, and at peace. Mr. Barrett, the prosecutor asked, why did you investigate Judge Calloway? Desmond looked at Valeria. Because justice isn't a gavel, sir. It isn't a robe. Justice is the belief that no one is above the law. When I saw what she was doing, using the law as a weapon to hurt the people she was sworn to protect, I knew I couldn't look away. I had the skills to stop her. So I did. Did you hate her? The prosecutor asked. No, Desmond said. I pitied her. She had all that power, and she used it to create misery. That is a wasted life. Valeria felt tears hot and stinging in her eyes. Pity. He pitied her. That hurt more than hatred. Hatred was respect. Pity was for the pathetic. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. Guilty on all counts. Judge Alistair Thorne looked down at Valeria from the bench. His face was like granite. Valeria Calloway, he said, his voice booming, you have disgraced your office. You have disgraced the law. You have disgraced humanity. You treated this court as your personal fiefdom and its citizens as your serfs. He paused, letting the weight of the moment settle. You were fond of maximum sentences, Miss Calloway. You believed in being tough on crime. It is only fitting that this court applies your own philosophy to you. I sentence you to 25 years in federal prison without the possibility of parole. You are also ordered to pay $15 million in restitution to the victims of your schemes. Your assets are hereby seized to satisfy this judgment." The gavel came down. Bang! It was the loudest sound Valeria had ever heard. As the bailiffs moved to cuff her, she looked back at the gallery one last time. She was looking for someone to save her, someone to sympathize. But all she saw was Desmond Barrett walking out of the courtroom into the sunlight. He didn't look back. Years later, the prison yard was a slab of gray concrete surrounded by razor wire that hummed in the wind. Inmate 8940 pushed a mop bucket across the cafeteria floor. The water was lukewarm and smelled of bleach, a smell that had permanently settled into Valeria Calloway's pores. At 66, Valeria looked 80. The stress of prison life, the constant noise, the terrible food, the ever-present threat of violence had hollowed her out. She walked with a limp now. Her arthritis was bad, and the prison infirmary only offered ibuprofen. "Hey, Calloway," a younger inmate, a woman serving years for drug trafficking, shouted from a table. "You missed a spot." Valeria tightened her grip on the mop handle. In her old life, she would have held this woman in contempt. She would have added years to her sentence just for the tone of voice. Now, Valeria just nodded, dipped the mop, and swiped at the invisible spot. "Sorry," Valeria mumbled. "That's right," the woman laughed. "Keep scrubbing, Judge." Valeria Calloway, the Queen of Oak Creek, was now the prison janitor. It was a poetic justice that the other inmates relished. Many of them knew who she was. Some had even been sentenced by judges just like her. She was a pariah, even among criminals. She spent her nights in her cell, writing letters that she never sent. She wrote to her husband, but he had divorced her months after the conviction and moved to Florida with a 25-year-old yoga instructor. She wrote to her friends at the country club, but she knew they would never open an envelope with a prison stamp. She was alone, truly, utterly alone. The power she had worshipped was dust. The money she had stolen was gone. All she had left was the memory of the moment the gavel came down and the face of the man who had brought it down. 500 miles away, Oak Creek was a town transformed. The Plaza Project land, which Valeria and Vance had tried to steal, was now the Barrett Community Center. It was a beautiful complex. There was a legal aid clinic, a job training center, and a large playground for the neighborhood kids. The funding had come from the seized assets of the corrupt officials. Valeria's portfolio had paid for the library. Councilman Vance's hidden offshore accounts had paid for the basketball courts. Desmond Barrett sat on a bench outside the center, watching a group of kids play tag. He held a cup of coffee in his hands, enjoying the morning sun. He hadn't left Oak Creek. After the trial, he had received offers. The FBI wanted him back. Major accounting firms in New York offered him 7-figure salaries to head their fraud departments. He had turned them all down. He had realized that his skills were needed here on the ground, helping people who couldn't fight back. He had opened a small consulting firm in the back of Mr. Nolan's auto shop. He helped locals audit their bank loans, fight unfair evictions, and navigate the labyrinth of bureaucracy. He was the people's auditor. "Morning, Mr. Barrett," a voice called out. It was Gary Langston. The former public defender looked different these days. He stood taller. He was now the district attorney of Oak Creek, elected in a landslide after the corruption scandal cleared the way for honest leadership. "Morning, Gary," Desmond smiled. "How's the docket?" "Clean. Fair. We just dismissed a dozen old cases that had Kane's fingerprints on them. We're finally scrubbing the stain out of this town." Gary looked at the community center. "You know, people still talk about it. The day you walked into that courtroom, they call it the reckoning." Desmond took a sip of coffee. "It wasn't a reckoning, Gary. It was just a correction. The ledger was unbalanced. We just fixed the math." "You did more than fix the math," Gary said quietly. "You gave people their dignity back. That's worth more than any audit." Desmond watched the kids playing. One of them, a little girl with braided hair, laughed as she ran. For a moment, he thought of his own daughter, Maya. The grief was still there, a quiet ache in his chest. But it wasn't a crushing weight anymore. It was a part of him, a reminder of why he fought. He had lost his family, but in saving this town, he had found a home. "You ever think about her?" Gary asked, knowing who he meant. "Valeria." Desmond looked at the sky. "I don't. She made her choices. She's living in the world she created. That's punishment enough." Gary pulled a crumpled envelope from his pocket. "She sent a letter to my office, addressed to you. I screened it. It's pathetic. Mostly blaming the system, blaming her lawyers, but she asks for forgiveness at the end." Gary held it out. Desmond looked at the envelope. Inmate 8940. He didn't take it. "Burn it," Desmond said softly. "You don't want to read it?" "No. I don't need her apology, and she doesn't need my forgiveness. She needs to understand that she isn't the center of the universe anymore. Silence is the only lesson she has left to learn." Desmond turned and walked toward the auto shop, where Mr. Nolan was waving at him with a wrench. There was work to be done. Real work, honest work. Gary watched him go, then looked at the letter. He struck a match, held it to the corner of the envelope, and dropped it into the trash can. He watched as the words, "Judge Valeria Calloway," curled into ash and blew away in the wind, gone forever. Justice had been served. And in Oak Creek, for the first time in a long time, the sun was shining on everyone equally. And that is the story of how Judge Valeria Calloway went from the bench to a cell block. It's a powerful reminder that no amount of money, power, or connections can protect you when you build your life on the suffering of others. Valeria thought Desmond Barrett was just a mechanic she could crush. But she forgot the golden rule of karma. The higher you climb on a ladder of lies, the harder you fall when the truth comes out. Desmond didn't just win a court case. He dismantled a corrupt empire without throwing a single punch, proving that knowledge and integrity are the most dangerous weapons of all. If you enjoyed this story of justice served cold, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel. Don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell notification so you never miss a story. Share this video with someone who needs a reminder that the good guys can still win. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.